Good morning, everyone, or good afternoon, and welcome. My name is Mara Gittleman. I am the Workshops and Education Coordinator for NYC Parks GreenThumb. We are the part of the New York City Parks Department that works with community gardens across the city. And we're so excited to be here today with Owen Taylor and Zainab Mohammed from Truelove Seeds, our seed keeping partners and friends across over in Pennsylvania. And they'll introduce themselves in just a minute. But thank you all so much for being here for part 3 of our seed saving in New York City series. If you missed part 1 and 2, I'll put those links in the chat. And we're really grateful for Truelove Seeds for doing this series with us. So we are going to be using the chat for all Q&A. So if you have any questions throughout their presentation, you can go ahead and put them there. I'm going to keep track of them and hold on to them until it's time for questions. And lastly, we are recording today's session and we'll make it available to you on our website and our YouTube after probably early next week. Thank you everyone so much for being here. I'm seeing a reminder in the chat that this Saturday is GreenThumb's Open Garden Day. So we invite you to head out and see all of the community gardens in New York City. A lot of them are going to be open this weekend and doing tours and workshops, and we're very excited for this opportunity to actually see people in person and be back together in that way. So without further ado, I'm going to pass the mic over to Zainab and Owen. Thank you both so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks everyone for being here. Thanks so much to GreenThumb for doing this series with us and letting us share what we know about keeping seeds with the garden community in New York City and beyond. And also just for being such a great partner over the years in general. So thank you so much. I am Owen. I'm one of the founders of Truelove Seeds, a seed company that offers culturally important vegetable, herb, and flower seeds grown by farmers committed to food justice and cultural preservation and sustainable agriculture. And so we also do a lot of education so that we can make sure that people are able to save their own seeds when, you know, it's been hard the last couple of years to get the seeds that we want when we want them. So we want to make sure that people are learning these skills and also so that you can identify what crops are most important to you. And if they're hard to find commercially, you can save them anyway. And even if you can find it commercially, you know, it's a fun, free exercise in food sovereignty. So this is why we want to share these skills with you. I'll pass it over to you to introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Zainab, also known as ZM. I'm a seed farmer at Truelove and the market coordinator at Greensgrow here in Philly. Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's my intro.
Nice. Well, I'm excited to be leading the workshop with you. It's our first workshop we're leading together. We are borrowing a lot of slides from a previous workshop that ZM and Jackie Pilati put together. So thanks for that. This is a rare opportunity since it's a 3-part series to just focus this hour on the part where we get our hands on. A lot of times we start with the politics and justice elements of seed keeping, the botany and theoretical and planning aspects of seed keeping. But since we already kind of talked about those, this hour gets to be just on when do you save seeds and how do you go about saving seeds once you have them in your hand. So that's cool. And it's gonna be mixed media. We're gonna play several videos from our YouTube station, like little portions of them, but also have a live demo that ZM will be doing for you with the cutting board and the fruits in front of us. And then we'll leave time for questions and conversation. So let's get into it. We did leave one slide here just as a placeholder. We looked at this in a previous workshop and we'll send it out to everyone in an email who were part of this workshop. Some handy tip sheets on considerations for planning your seed keeping garden. And the links to the videos that you'll see will also be shared with you. So
Yeah, so there's you know, certain tools that you need for seed cleaning, and they don't have to be expensive at all. A lot of the stuff that we use at the farm are, you know, paper bags and kitchen, you know, strainers and sieves, knives from your kitchen, plates, anything flat, like cutting boards, brown paper. You'll also need things to label your seeds while they're fermenting, and when you need to store them as well. So like tape, markers, to store your seeds in airtight containers and jars. And these can be like really inexpensive things that you can find around your house, or that you can like just buy from like the 99-cent store or the thrift store. So it's really inexpensive to clean seeds and also store them. As you can see.
I'm just showing you a lot of our props that we use, a lot of our tools that we use on the farm. You saw everything I showed you before this was from the kitchen, and I'd find in grocery stores or thrift stores, like you were saying. These ones are awesome because they fit in our big harvest buckets, and they're really hard to find. So I have a couple from, flea markets. This year we leveled up and purchased custom screens, like maybe 20 different gauges. It costs $1,000. But at this point in our evolution as a seed company, it's going to save us a lot of time and money to be able to be like, this one's just for peppers or whatever. Instead of every time we clean a seed, trying to find the right random sieve that we found at a thrift store.
Right.
But you don't have to buy $1,000 worth of screens. You can just use what you already have in the house. So, and you'll see a lot of these in action as we do this workshop.
Okay, so there are a few things to look for when harvesting fruit and seed pods for seed cleaning. The first thing that you want to notice is what type of fruit is it? What type of pod is it? If it's like a tomato or something, you would harvest it when it's like ripe, like you would eat it normally. Just like peppers, you would harvest it like you would eat it like normally. But something like cucumbers or squash or bitter melon, as you can see in the pictures, you want to wait until it's like overripe. Like this would be probably yellow when it would be ready for seed harvest. And for like seed pods, you would wait until it would get papery and like kind of like hard on the outside. And those are some indicators for the ripeness and maturity for seed harvesting.
Yeah, I mean, if you notice, you mind if I cut this open? I don't know if you were going to do that later, but okay. I'm going to cut this cucumber open. I mean, you've probably all seen a cucumber inside, but if you look at the seeds in a cucumber, they're so flimsy. These ones are hardly even there. And if you think about seeds you've planted in the garden of cucumbers, they're like a white, hard seed that's hard to bend, right? And that in the squash family is a good indication of ripeness when it's like you could hardly even bite through it. So obviously cucumber, you can't just harvest the seeds from these little guys. Like Zainab said, they have to get big and ugly and a little squishy. And with the peppers, yes, when you eat them, but not if they're green or purple. Green and purple peppers are not ripe. So you got to let them keep maturing. And we have a little video, maybe unless there's something else you want to say about ripeness. Okay. I can't think of anything. Well, one other thing I want to say about it is when you start keeping seeds, you really have to like pay close attention to your plants and start to think about their life cycle. And think, oh, does that seem like it's ready for the next generation in the state that it's in right now? So you want to really look at the ripeness of the fruit, think about if it's fully matured. You want to think of it as a pregnancy, right? So this pepper plant was pregnant with these seeds, and you don't want to pull it off the plant before the full term, right? If you want viable seeds. And so you're going to think about those seeds inside pulling nutrients from the plant, and fully forming before it's time to pull it off. And you also want to think about not waiting too long, because there's elements of predators, like birds like to eat a lot of seeds. There's elements of weather. Sometimes the rain will ruin a dry seed pod and make it rot. There's elements of the fruit itself rotting and maybe causing some disease or rot that might compromise the viability of the seed. Like we won't let the peppers dry on the plants. Peppers, some people do that and have okay success, but we've found that the best viability for peppers, for example, or a lot of these wet seeded crops, and we'll talk about wet versus dry, you want to pull them off while they're still juicy. You're not going to wait for them to dehydrate and rot on the plant, but you will simulate rotting in a kind of controlled way with some of these things, like with tomatoes, for example, or bitter melon. So let's watch a short video of some dry seed, some dry seeded crops where we're showing when it's time to harvest them. I'll press play.
Okay, quick note. While this video is mostly about plants with seed heads, where they're just filled with tons of seeds on a stalk, like where a flower was, beans, peas, the whole legume family, the mallow family, like okra, malchia, so on. They have these individual pods usually, and they turn brown and crispy. And you can hear the crispy crackle, and that's when it's ready to pull that individual pod up. If it's a bush bean, you can take the whole plant up when they're this crispy or close to it and let them continue drying. We're about to see some of the cabbage family plants, which are similar in that they have dry pods when you harvest them. But you'll see in the next video that we took some of our broccoli raw pods a bit early on the entire plant so that they can dry down to this crispy state in our high tunnel. Normally, if we were in a dry, less humid climate, we'd let them stay on the plants until this stage instead. We've harvested our broccoli rabe stalks. Some of them are pretty green still. Some are ripe and crispy, which is really where we want them to be. But we harvested them really low in the plant so that the life forces and juices will continue to ripen these less ripe pods. We're harvesting it now because about half the crop is crispy and we need to rotate out that row for something else. And in this climate, one reason for harvesting early is if it rains, the pods will rot. Also, the birds are after them, and we just took our bird netting off to get the ripe ones. And so instead of sacrificing it all to the birds, we're going to try our hand at letting it ripen out of the ground. And so just laying it on this table with all the seed pods above the fabric so that as they shatter, the seeds drop into the fabric, and then we can gather them. And I'm going to keep the already shattered seeds separate. And then afterwards, we'll cover these with rime so that the birds don't come in and eat all the seeds like they want to. So that's it for this stage, but there's already so much ripe seed here just from a couple buckets for our broccoli rabe seed crop here. So we're going to get a good amount of seed, even just from what we're doing right now. So what you didn't see earlier is we harvested our lettuce plants. This is a lettuce plant at the base when well over half of the flowers had poofed out with all these what they call feathers. That's what these are called. And so at that point, they ripen gradually. So you have to make a decision at some point when you're going to take the whole plant because the ripe seeds will start to float away on the wind, where the birds will get them, where the rain will get them. And so we harvested these at the base so that they can continue ripening about a week ago and laid them out in the high tunnel where there's air circulation, there's sun, which is safe for the seeds because they're enclosed in these seed pods and not exposed. And there's no rain. And we covered them with rime to keep the birds off.
There's a little sample.
Okay, quick note. While this video is mostly about plants with seed heads.
There we go. How do we go to the next screen? There we go. So that's a little on when to harvest. Obviously, every species is a little different, but that gives you a sense of some of the possibilities for common crops. So
Yeah. So some seed cleaning methods, like you just saw with the dry seed cleaning of the lettuce, wet seed cleaning method basically involves cutting out the seeds from the fruit and putting it into some sort of like container like this, or maybe like a cup if you have that, and covering it with paper towel or like a thin cloth to keep just bugs out, and securing it with a rubber band and labeling it with the date and what it is. And that process is called fermenting. And then you'll leave that maybe for about 3 to 4 days, I guess, depending on the temperature. When it's hot, it definitely happens a lot quicker. And then from there, you would decant, which is basically pouring off the top layer of like non-viable seed and like the fruit flesh and any like mold or anything that accumulated on the top, and you would just pour that off, rinse it, and then keep doing it until the seeds are clean. And then you'd get like brown paper bag and lay it out on like a flat surface to dry. And it takes about like 2 weeks to fully dry. And then from there, you'd be able to clean the seeds further and also label again. Labeling is very important. just to know what you have and what date you cleaned it. So laying it out on a flat surface to dry, and then from there, after the final cleaning, you could store it in an airtight container.
Nice. Well, do you want to show people?
Yeah.
That place. Also, hi Fareed. I just realized that the adult man who I was seeing is Fareed. It's nice to see you. Fareed and his family used to teach a lot of seed saving workshops in New York City, so it's an honor to have you here. Here we go.
So you would get, say like you have a tomato and you want to save the seeds from the tomato, you would cut it.
Actually, can I pause you for a second? Can we close the shared screen while we're doing this demo so that your video is larger? Thank you. Perfect.
So you would get your fruit or any vegetable that you want to save seeds from. You would cut it. I think for tomatoes, I would cut it like horizontally just so that all of the seeds are kind of exposed. And then you would get your container and just squeeze the seeds out. And like use your hand or use a spoon to get all the seeds out. And then from there, you would add some water.
Just a little.
Just a little bit, just to cover it. And then you would get a paper towel or your cloth. You would cover it, secure it with a rubber band. And then from there, you would label it. So we would put the variety of tomato, or if you don't know, just tomato. And then the date, 6/2.
Third, I think. Oh, yep, the third.
And then you would just label it. And I think what will be helpful for some people, I know for me, sometimes I kind of forget about things that are fermenting if I'm doing it at home. So just like maybe set a reminder that you have this going. And then it would look like this. And then in a few days, you would take the cover off and then decant, and then.
I put a little decanting video in. I wonder, maybe we'll show it after, if we can do it not a non-linear thing here.
Mm-hmm.
when we start sharing the screen again.
And then after the decanting, you would put it on like a flat surface with like brown paper and label again, and then wait until they're dry. And then you can dry clean them and then save them in your label container. And that's basically the wet processing, sort of similar to dry processing also, but we're just fermenting and then decanting.
You want to do, while we have the screen off, maybe we could do the other wet stuff too.
Sure. So peppers, they could also be considered wet. I know that we found a method at Truelove where we were harvesting a lot of seeds from like a larger quantity. And so we filled up a bucket with water and just kind of smashed them all in the bucket. And that was the best method for us to get the most seed out of a larger quantity. But if you just have a few peppers, this definitely will work. So you would just get a flat surface and like a brown paper bag and just put the seeds directly on to the paper and label them. And also wait until these are dry for about 2 weeks before you clean them and store them. So it would look something like, ooh, can you see that? Something like this.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. The squash.
This one's hard to do because
Yeah.
we have a box under here.
Let's try it out. Let's see what happens. Okay, for squash. You would basically do the same exact thing.
With you treat summer squash and winter squash the same way, and yeah, pretty much the same way, because you have to wait for the summer squash to get big and hard with a hard dry stem like a winter squash before it's ready. So you'd wait for your zucchini to get giant and discolored and for the stem to get a little brown before you harvest it for seed.
And you would do the exact same thing and just basically take out all of the seeds.
And these are nice and hard, you know, if I try to put my fingernail in it, it's so slippery. It doesn't really make an indent. They're very firm. So that's when you know the seed is ready to be stored or planted.
And then you would label it. And put it in like a cool, dry place. Humidity is not your friend when it comes to seed keeping.
Mm-mm. Okay, I'm going to go back to, let's see here, how to get back to the video. Are we still here?
Yeah, you're still here. So you should be able to just open the green share screen button and go back to your.
Okay, I'm trying to find that. I can just see ourselves right now. Let's see here. Video, exit, minimize video. There we go. Okay, share screen. And sorry, one moment, everybody.
You're doing great.
There it is. Can you see the shared screen now?
Yes.
Okay. Make it big. Great. So here's a I believe we're going here into the decanting process after you've fermented those tomatoes. We also ferment, as you can see here, cucumbers, like cantaloupes, bitter melons. We also do
Passion flower.
passion fruits, passion flower, anything with like a gel that's kind of stuck around the seed that the fermentation can take off and make seed cleaning easier.
Deal with that. I'm adding, with a little bit of force, an entire bucket worth of water. The force is to kind of mix up all the, like the mat of mold and ferment and pulp on top, which helps to free up some of the seeds, the good seeds that might have gotten trapped in that mat of funk. So I'm definitely splashing myself with funky tomato water, and I'm going to let it settle. One thing you could do is take a stick and stir it up a little more, but I kind of sprayed it pretty hard, so it should be pretty good. I'm letting it settle. You can imagine all the seeds are like twirling around the whole thing, and now they're like settling down to the bottom. I'm going to pour off the top over here. This is what we call decanting. You see, here comes the gunk, the foam, the skin, and any kind of bad, quote unquote, bad seeds are unviable. So I'll go as far as I feel comfortable that I'm not going to pour out seeds. You can see them hanging out around in the back there. And then I'm going to do it all over again. And so all we have is clear water and good seeds. It might take, 2 or 3 or 4 tries until we get to that point. Again, we call this decanting. One of the best parts of cleaning tomato seeds this way is, it just does a really good job of cleaning them in a way you couldn't do without this fermentation process, because that gel is around the seeds, all that pulp. It just separates it really well. I might be losing a few good seeds in there, but it's worth it for all the other benefits of fermenting. See, it's getting pretty clean. It's almost all clear water and good seeds. This process helps with some, if there's any disease organisms in there, this will help with fighting that off, though we only select from fruits and plants that are not diseased in appearance. Just in case, the fermentation process helps with that. Might lose some more good seeds here. So at some point you have to make a judgment call about when it's beneficial to keep decanting and when it's causing you to lose some good seeds. We'll call it quits now. It's pretty much clear water and good seeds. Any of the other bits in there we'll pick out in the during or after the drying process. And now we're going to strain it. A little bit more. So when working with seeds, you want to make sure your strainer is smaller than the size of your seed. Obviously, have to pour seeds into things that they then fell through. You don't want that in this case when you're straining out the water. So I'm just knocking it, getting some of the water out.
Okay, and so after this, I push my hands against it to squeeze the water out, or you can put them in a paper towel briefly just to squeeze out the water. And then we dry them just like Zainab was showing on a paper bag, paper box, something with stiff paper that they won't stick to as they dry. We don't use paper towels to dry them.
No, or paper plates.
Right, they can really stick. So that's that.
Deal with that.
I'm having trouble
with a
with
little bit of
having trouble with technology. Okay, next. So those are some of the wet seeded crops. So dry processing, it's interesting. I usually consider peppers to be wet, but it's true. It's very similar to how we do other dry seeded crops in terms of shelling beans or okra. You're just opening it up and letting the seeds out. So it kind of straddles the line between wet and dry processing. Something mentioned in the last video was that we select the best fruits that have no disease. And that's something we didn't talk about yet in this workshop, is the selection process. Anyone who's saving seeds becomes a plant breeder just by the act of saving seeds, because you're making a choice which plants will be the next generation, will have the seeds of the next generation. And so you should make that choice wisely and think about saving the most delicious looking, most beautiful, most healthy plants to be the parents of your next generation, because then you're selecting, you're making some selection there about what your harvest next year will look like. If you're saying, oh, that one's ugly, I'll save the seeds of that, then you'll be saving the children of the ugly fruit. Every fruit is beautiful, God's creation, but you get to make a choice of who's going to make it to the future in terms of your garden. And so that's why we pick the unblemished, most delicious, most beautiful, most healthy plants to be the parents of the next generation. As a seed saver, you're basically a plant breeder in that way. And so here's also a picture of winnowing, which we'll show a short video of with the winnowing basket. This is a video of Jackie and our coworker Amira threshing some, it looks like probably some type of basil seed heads, something in the mint family, probably basil of some sort. And this is what we do with almost every one of our dry seeded crops, especially if it's on a seed head, like a cluster of seeds on a plant, where we'll let them dry, as we showed in a previous video, for maybe a day in the sun or in the high tunnel, and then whack them in a bucket with our hands or a stick, or whack them in a tarp that's folded over, or a sheet or a pillowcase. And that's to release the seeds that are ripe. And over the years, I've stopped trying to get every seed out of the plants that we harvest, because the best seeds fall first. The ripest seeds are more ready to fall out of the plant than the unripe seeds. And so if you're really trying to get every single seed out of your plant, you may be going for some unripe seeds too that won't grow as well or won't grow at all. So we just whack until like maybe 80–90% of the seeds seem to have fallen out. And then we move on to sifting through these various strainers and then winnowing. Here's a video about sifting.
So the next stage is to separate all the big chunks of chaff, which is basically all the plant material we don't want, from the seeds. And so a lot of times I'll start with a bigger mesh, a bigger gauge mesh, to get out the sticks and the big chunks, and then get smaller and smaller. So let's try this one that we just made, this screen. When you have a bunch of sticks in it, sometimes it helps to just go back and forth versus rocking it a lot to keep the sticks on the surface. This is kind of a big, heavy thing to deal with. So let's look and see what we have so far. A lot of the seed heads are still coming through, but you can see a lot more seed now. See, that's all seed. So I'll do a little more, but I think we've gotten most of our seed out because the gauge is so large. I'm going to assume that we got most of the seed. What you can do to check is put your hand underneath. It's hard when it's this heavy, but what I see mostly is chaff. I see one seed. I can assume that it's mostly all come through. So I'm going to put this in the compost. So now with this, I'm going to find a smaller gauge screen. I think this one works very well. Basically go to thrift stores and yard sales and the kitchen and get as many versions of these sieves as you can find, because even the smallest difference in the gauge will make it appropriate for a very specific seed. And I think this one will be hopefully pretty good for this motherwort. And look, it has a handy little extender. I think I got this at Vietnamese grocery store in South Philly. and then I'll do this, and the seeds are coming out. See, I didn't put it all in at once because that can be overwhelming. And then again, I'm gonna put my hand under. I see one seed and a bunch of other stuff, a bunch of chaff. So I'll just put my hand under and check. One seed, a bunch of chaff. So I'm gonna dump this because it's done. So putting your hand under is a really important trick. Sometimes you can winnow and sift at the same time. And you can see the lightest weight chaff is coming out while I sift over the bucket. I'm putting my hand down now and you see it's full of seeds. So I'm just gonna keep going until I find that most of the seeds have fallen out. See, hardly anything else is coming out now. So compost and a bunch of seeds, and we'll finish it up and then show the winnowing process. So the next stage is to separate all the big chunks of chaff, which is basically all the.
Sorry, let's go to the next one. Okay, so that's sifting. It's pretty straightforward, but I hope it's helpful to see the process and some of the little tricks we've learned along the way. When you've got mostly seed, it's time to winnow using your breath or the wind.
Or a fan.
Or a fan. Yep, there's a lot of ways to blow off the lightweight chaff. So the previous step was the heavy stuff, the big stuff, the heavy stuff. And the next step is getting the lightweight stuff off. So here's a quick video on that.
So again, here's a better view of what's happening. Throw the seed material and chaff kind of back towards yourself gently and kind of keep it on your side of the tray or the winnowing basket or bowl. And the lightweight chaff will move away from you if you're doing it right towards the lip and into the wind. One way to help it, is to move the tray clockwise or counterclockwise every now and then so that you can kind of access a new portion of the seeds and chaff and get more of that dusty chaff out towards the edge of the tray. Keep rotating. Carry back. You see the chaff there? And just get that out. And then rotate and do it again.
Okay, and that's winnowing, and it takes a lot of work to get the process where you feel like you're actually doing something.
Yeah, and not blowing all of the seed everywhere else.
Yeah, how has that been for you? I don't know how much time you've got to spend with these, but
yeah, I think we winnowed sometimes, but it was mostly like using the strainers and the sieves.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
When I'm first teaching apprentices, we put down a tarp underneath.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes when I'm worried about my own ability to do it well, depending on the type of seed and how heavy it is, then I'll put a tarp down just in case we lose a bunch of seeds. We can pick them up again and try again. So this method we learned from some of the Karen refugee farmers from Burma that farm here in South Philly at Novik Family Urban Farm. And they told us where to find these baskets at a Burmese grocery store. And they really, really help. Before this, we were using giant bowls for the same purpose, which do work. I've used them for years and years, but these winnowing baskets make it a lot easier to work with. They're really ready for rice, cleaning rice. So let's see, next. So, one thing we didn't talk about, and maybe you could share your experiences, we didn't talk much about like beans and okra and things that we don't thresh the same way.
Right. So yeah, okra and beans, my experience cleaning them, I know I've used either just our hands, sometimes we'll just sit around and just shell peas or just take apart the okra and then just lay it out on brown paper. Another method that I tried was if it's a really large quantity, you would put the seed pods in a tarp and just kind of stomp around on them and like dance, or in a bucket maybe, and then do the same process by laying them out to dry on brown paper. So yeah, those are some other seed cleaning methods that we've done at the farm and I've done like elsewhere. So yeah, you don't even need tools to do some of the seed cleaning. You can just use your hands and your feet.
Yeah, it's ancient stuff.
Mhm.
I save a lot of okra and beans for big community events because anybody from like 3 years old to 100 years old can sit around and clean those seeds together. And it's a really nice way to gather and do something with your hands that feels like ancient and meaningful, and doesn't take a lot of skill. So that's a pro tip if you're having a community garden day where there's a lot of people coming in the fall, and you want a fun task, intergenerational task. That's a great one. It's really fun. So drying wet and dry seed, we treat them the same.
Yeah, basically.
Mhm.
Cool, dark space on brown paper, labeled 2 to 3 weeks for drying. And sometimes we use a seed cleaning machine, but not everyone has one of those. So winnowing, or I know for the tomato seeds, we use our hands to unclump them as like a final seed process before they go into the jars and like can be stored. What else?
Yeah, this is a picture on the right, I'm sorry, on the left of my car, because we have to drive stuff from the farm where we process it to the basement that you see on the right. And it's kind of dangerous because you see all these seeds that look similar next to each other. So one thing we do in both, anywhere where there's seeds, is keep like away from like, since every tomato seed looks the same pretty much. Well, there's no tomato seed trays next to another tomato seed tray, for example, in case they jump or spill. For us, it's really important we don't mix up the varieties at all, since we're selling them and sharing them so widely, and so many of them are so important to people. We don't want to give someone the wrong thing. So that's why labeling is important, and keep finding ways to keep things separate are important. If you don't have a basement with a dehumidifier and a fan, you can find just a darker room in your house, maybe, or some space that's not in the way that you could put a fan on to help with the drying process. And again, 2 weeks is our rule of thumb here, because we want it, once it feels dry a couple days in, it's still not dry. It's going to seem dry, but it's still holding moisture. And once you put it into storage, that can really cause problems with mold, and so on, or maybe it'll start growing if it's really wet. So you want to really, really, really have it dry for it to be able to sit in storage for the next year or 2 or 5, and stay dormant and healthy. So let's see. Seed storage. Oh, I brought out some jars. We use recycled, this was a tomato sauce jar, or ball jars, something with a screw top, because to keep critters out, especially bugs, but all kinds of critters. We recently heard from a community that we donated a bunch of seeds to from their culture, that mice had eaten all the seeds we gave them a year ago, because they left them in the Ziploc bags that we gave them to them in. And so this year we gave them more, but put them right in jars with lids that screw. That's something I learned from my mentor, Dr. William Moyes Weaver. Most of this is something I've learned from him, but he always said to, for them not to be able to crawl up in, have a screw top. Even when you have seed packets, like this is a jar of seed packets, and we put them in a glass jar or a plastic jar with a screw top lid. Yeah, and everything's labeled. Like labeling is the theme of this workshop. So,
last question. What are some seed saving successes and challenges that you experienced last growing season in 2020? And what do you look for this growing season in 2021?
So that's a prompt for you. Feel free to answer that in this conversation, or ask other questions.
While folks are answering, we did have one question, which was, are there any guides that can let you know what goes with wet seed saving and what goes with dry?
Yeah, I think kind of just the I guess the fruit itself can kind of tell you that. Sometimes I think. Yeah, because this could be wet or dry, like peppers can. But I think the best gauge is like what type of vegetable or fruit it is. Like, is it wet when you cut it open? And I think that is kind of like my rule of thumb. Before I started seed saving, I was like, I think this is supposed to be done differently than beans or like okra or something like that.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, okra is a good example of a wet fruit that you actually need to dry completely before you harvest it. And so it's some of it's intuition, like I said earlier, like when is the seed fully done maturing? But one way that when I was first starting that was really helpful to me was to get Seed to Seed by Suzanne Ashworth. It's like the most comprehensive seed saving manual that I've seen, in that she has so many species in there, so many different types of plants. A lot of seed saving books are fairly basic, like kind of Eurocentric, tomatoes, peppers, lettuces, but Seed to Seed has a huge array of species in there. And it's just a great resource if you're really going to commit to saving seeds. And I'm sure that there's lots of online resources too that you could access if you're not ready to buy that book. Just Google wet versus dry seed saving. I'm sure there's lists out there. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, does powdery mildew get transferred in seeds?
It's a good question.
I've never experienced that.
Yeah, me either. I honestly still have work to do in terms of understanding which diseases are seed-borne. And I don't want to answer the wrong way with that. For us, we avoid dealing with that in that we don't ever save seeds from plants that are diseased. But I'm really not. I'm actually not sure. My feeling is that it's not, but I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Cool, thank you.
Similarly, like when our tomatoes, if and when they get late blight, this is actually brings up a really good point. You want to save seeds from the first fruits. Usually, there's exceptions, but when it's the fruit that you eat, you want to save seeds from the first fruits. For example, squash, tomatoes, peppers, because a lot of diseases happen later in the season. That's one reason to get your seed saving in before diseases hit the crops. The other reason is you're selecting for earlier harvest. So if you wait until the very end of the season to harvest your tomato seeds, you may be selecting for late producing tomatoes. If you harvest your very first fruits for seed, you're selecting for earlier fruit production because that plant that is the parent was the one in your farm or your garden that produced fruits first. And so you're saying, oh, that's the parent that I want for next year. With things like where you eat the leaves or maybe the roots, like lettuce, you want to save seeds from the last to go to seed so that you're selecting for, resistance to bolting, for example. Like if you want a lettuce that's not going to go to seed or flower right away in the season, you want to wait for that last lettuce that bolted. And then you're selecting for late flowering and late seed production. So this is kind of related to your question in that we, always harvest the first fruits. We try to get as many weeks of tomato harvest in before any late blight shows up, for example. And so once we see any signs of late blight, we just pull the plants out and we stop, or we just use it for food production and no longer take seeds from it. So.
Trying to remember if this is powdery mildew or downy mildew, but one of them comes in on storms. And there are some trackers. I think Cornell Cooperative Extension has some resources that can give you a heads up on when it's coming, but I think it has more to do with like the pH of the surface of the leaf than anything else, and general susceptibility. But I also don't know if it stays attached to seeds or not.
Mhm.
Folks, if you have more questions, please go ahead and put them in the chat. I will read them out loud. There was someone who wanted clarification when you were decanting the tomatoes in the video, the tomato seeds. What kind of bucket or pot were you using for that? Was it just like a regular bucket? Was it one of those nursery pots that have draining holes in it?
Oh no, it was a regular bucket. You don't want drainage holes. It was a cut flower harvest bucket that we just happen to use for decanting also. We like the shape of them for the size harvests that we have.
Great, perfect.
Maybe also, if I don't know how, we can't see the questions coming in, but to inspire more questions, I'd love to know if people have specific crops they're hoping to save seeds from this year and want to know any more information about it.
There's a request to talk more about the fermentation of seeds. The person who asked that question, can you talk about why you need to ferment them?
We ferment seeds to get the like gelatinous coating off of them that make them viable for seed keeping and to plant for the next season. This is just an example. But if this was a tomato seed, I don't know if you can see that. But if we had a tomato seed and the gel coating around it stayed there, it would just rot. And it wouldn't be viable for seed keeping and planting. So we ferment just to get that off of the seed so that it can dry and then it can be used for later plantings.
Yeah, well, so the first time I ever saw tomato seed saving was actually from a GreenThumb gardener in Bed-Stuy who just put them on paper towels fresh from the fruit and let them dry and then replanted the next year, like put the towel in the soil. And it does work. However, in the gel, there's some sort of, tomatoes don't usually grow out of themselves, the fruit. So the gel is to keep it from germinating. And if you leave the gel on, like you're saying, it won't necessarily be always viable. So that is, one of the main reasons, though people will tell you their grandfather taught them to just put it on the towel and it works, which is totally fine. But for us, beyond that, we also, like we said in the video, there's some disease control that happens because of the microorganisms involved in the fermentation process. So it will help to lower any disease organisms in that seed. And it just makes it easier to clean and store.
Yeah.
Like you were saying, if there's a gel on it, or if it's on that paper towel and it's still got little bits of gel dried up, it's just, for us, it's easier to store it when all that gel is gone.
So then after you ferment the seeds and after they dry, you mentioned dry cleaning. What does that entail?
Basically just rubbing them, or like rubbing them on like a screen, just to detach them, because oftentimes seeds will just stick together once they dry. So another tip with drying would be like lay them as flat as you can. Maybe use like a fork to spread them out on the dry paper. And then we use one of these screens sometimes to like rub them through, or sometimes we use our hands to unclump them. And that's basically like the final process.
Yeah, we love this particular screen because the holes are much bigger than a tomato, but by pushing it through, it really breaks them up into individual seeds with the way that this one's shaped. So it just means that you can more easily plant one seed at a time next year.
Do we know botanically why some fruits have that gelatinous coating on the seeds? Like, does that help the plant?
Yeah, it's to prevent germination inside the fruit, because the fruit is dark and wet, which is like what seeds usually want to grow. And so especially in tomatoes, it's to keep it from just growing out of the fruit while it's sitting in that like warm, dark, wet place. So, you know, in nature, a tomato will drop its fruit on the ground and it'll rot, and the gel will rot off of it naturally over the, you know, the course of its decomposition process. And then it'll, you know, I'm not sure, but I imagine it might also delay, be a strategic delay of germination until, you know, sometime after the mother plant dies, which could benefit the children, the next generation. So that's why.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Zainab and Owen. It was really great to have you today. And I feel like we learned so much in such a short amount of time. So I really appreciate you teaching us all about the kind of hands-on saving seeds. So thank you both so much. And thank you everyone for coming today and for all of your amazing questions. And we hope to see you at future webinars.